All right, folks, welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is Brian Gatens, but I'm not the host today. That's Brent Friedland. As listeners know, we love to support USARA's The Checkpoint Podcast. And in this episode, number 9, Brent brings on Alyssa to talk about all things about doping and supplements and caffeine and all the topics and everything that goes around this idea, relatively new to adventure racing. And we really appreciate having Alyssa on the Checkpoint to talk about it. And we love the fact that we get to share the Checkpoint with our listeners over here at the Dark Zone. So if you've not already, please head over to your platform of choice and go and find USARA's The Checkpoint and enjoy the show. Brent does a great job with this one, as he does with all the episodes. Thanks for being a listener to the Dark Zone and to the Checkpoint. And remember, if you keep racing, all of us will keep talking.
We've got a good one for you today, and I hope that you are enjoying this winter season, whatever you might be doing, whether you're hibernating, training, daydreaming, shopping for new mountain bikes. This is, of course, that time of year where we all recharge for a new season of adventure racing. So with that in mind, thanks for taking a little bit of time here. Maybe you're out training, walking the dog, driving to work, but thanks for joining us once again for another episode of The Checkpoint, a podcast collaboration between USARA and the Dark Zone and Adventure Racing Podcast. I'm genuinely really excited about this episode today. We had a great conversation, or I should say I had a great conversation with Alyssa about doping in adventure racing and endurance sports in general, or to be a little bit more technically correct, really talking about the importance of anti-doping protocols and also the importance of education in sport. As you'll hear, after fumbling my way into a tough topic, I think things really got cooking, and we had a great conversation about all kinds of issues related to the topic of fair sport and clean sport, both from the perspective of thinking about the importance of a level playing field for competition, but also first and foremost about, all of our health as we, think about how we go about preparing for this sport and taking care of our bodies. Before we get going, we have just a short word about one of our many regional qualifiers that will be sending the premier mixed gender winning team to the national championship in the Ozarks region this year. So we hope to see many of you get out there to these regional qualifiers as they unfold throughout the year. So however you are listening, buckle up. Thanks again. And I hope you learned something about this really important topic that USARA has started to dive into over the last year. Thanks for joining us. Dyno Racing has been doing it longer than just about anyone around, directing races since 1990. And the Mission Adventure Race has been running every year since 2003. Brian Holzhausen, simply put, knows how to organize a race. Join Brian and his crew on May 3rd for the Midwest's first regional qualifier of the year, an 18-hour adventure race based out of a new venue, O'Bannon Woods State Park near Louisville, Kentucky. Racers will explore some of Indiana's most challenging and dramatic terrain through a modified Rogaine format. The race will have a linear feel, but within each segment of the event, teams will enjoy Rogaine-style navigation and route choice. This year's course also features ropes, and the race will challenge all participants for most, if not the full, 18 hours. Unique bunkhouse lodging is available at the race property, so join the Midwest adventure racing community for this legendary spring event, and come join us in the Ozarks for the 2025 USARA National Championship.
All right, I'm super excited to talk to Alyssa Godesky today. We are, as the introduction noted, going to have hopefully a interesting, perhaps like somewhat sensitive, but hopefully illuminating conversation about the topics of doping and anti-doping, basically in the sport, and more broadly speaking, since this is has not historically been a super, I guess, public issue in our sport, but I think it's one that increasingly people are chatting about and thinking about the implications of it. So I'm excited to welcome Alyssa, who has spent time as a professional triathlete and is a professional coach and knows way more about endurance sports and these kinds of issues than most of us, and broke into the sport of adventure racing back in, what was it? Was it 2018-ish?
Yeah, it depends on kind of what you call breaking in, but around 2018, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I first crossed paths with you at our Stockville event. I don't know if that was actually your first kind of, it wasn't an adventure race, but AR tangent race. So Alyssa, welcome to the show. Why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thanks, Brent. I'm really excited to chat with you about this topic. Yeah, I'm Alyssa Godesky. I raced as a professional triathlete from like 2014 till 2022. And during that time, I also was pretty active in ultra running, trail running, mountain running. And that kind of led me in a very roundabout way to actually wanting to get into the Barkley Marathons. And so that was where I decided I needed to learn navigation and kind of found the sport of adventure racing. And I found the Stockville that way. Had to learn some navigation skills that were very poor in 2018. I learned very quickly at the Stockville that I had a lot to learn. But I was hooked then, and then I managed to dupe my now husband, Matt, into starting to think about racing as well. And the pandemic gave us kind of that opportunity we needed to get some gear, do the research, and kind of get started in adventure racing a bit more. And I think, him and I both in the last few years have wanted to get more and more away from structure of triathlon and more into the adventure racing world. I'm currently, I don't know, I guess I could call it on like an injury sabbatical. So I've been injured for about a year and a half now. So I'm not currently racing too much of anything, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to some start lines here, hopefully this season.
Well, I can't wait to see you back out there. And, I know that the whole East Coast community feels lucky to have both you and Matt as part of our community now. And you bring a lot to the table. And I think we'll see that today. I think your experience in triathlon and with coaching and such really translates well to this topic. So I can't wait to hear what you think. So before we dive into kind of our conversation, I do want to just take a moment, as this is a USARA podcast, to just kind of speak a little bit more broadly as a representative of USARA with my official USARA cap on, just to kind of share some thoughts with the listeners about where USARA currently stands on the issue of kind of anti-doping protocols in the sport of adventure racing. This is an issue that really, it's come up in some loose ways over the years in our sport, typically at the international level. ARWS for a while, at least on paper, has had a note that they follow. I believe they have a note that they follow the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association. Is that right? Association? Mm-hmm. The WADA guidelines. But as far as I know, there's really never been any initiative or, frankly, necessarily the resources to do a kind of a sustained testing program in our sport. Testing is an expensive endeavor. It is challenging to do. And so adventure racing has been such a niche sport that it hasn't been something that's really come into play. That said, I think for a few reasons, it's a topic that sometimes bubbles up. I think that there have certainly been anecdotal stories and cases of some folks, I think, doing what athletes have always done in all sports, which is looking to get an advantage. And I think more importantly than that, I think there's been a lot of information and anecdotal stories as well about people taking supplements, taking different methods of treatments and such that are actually deemed to be forms of doping without actually realizing or intending to do anything wrong. And one thing that I've been learning a lot, and I'll maybe at some point share some of what I've learned personally with my own medical history, is there are some important medical considerations too that most of us don't think about. Things that we are doing with our doctors under doctors' care, which actually can kind of raise questions about doping and anti-doping rules. So USARA over the last year, we worked on kind of building a statement and a series of educational resources for the community. We are still, as I noted earlier, we're not in a position to implement any kind of standardized testing, though it is something that I think, we will continue to discuss as a potential avenue down the road if, things kind of develop in that direction from a kind of a logistical and a financial perspective. Until then, though, we do now publicly follow the USADA standards, the United States Anti-Doping Association. And you can spend days on the USADA website going down the rabbit hole of learning about just about anything and everything that you're interested in learning about, whether it's, kind of the more traditional kind of illegal doping, blood doping, et cetera, or learning about different effects of medications. There's a little bit of everything on there for everybody, or maybe I should say a lot of everything on there for everybody to actually learn. So what we did is we really kind of handpicked a number of articles and resources from the USADA website to kind of link to and try to get people started on their journey to better understanding this issue and also just better understanding how to better manage some of those, I guess, more subtle issues like supplement use, medications, prescribed medications, et cetera. There's also some additional links on our website. We might talk about some of them as the conversation unfolds, but we are, I don't think excited is the right word, but we feel very I think, serious about making sure that we try to push forward education right now in the sport of adventure racing, certainly in our own country. And, if that, helps other people outside of the United States learn more about this issue, I think that's a positive and a win as well. So with all of that said, I'm going to, throw you out the big kind of softball question of, Alyssa, why should we be thinking about this issue? There's so many ways we could answer this, but I'm curious what your initial reaction is to why should adventure racers be thinking about questions of doping and anti-doping in particular?
Yeah, I mean, of course, my initial reaction is going to be like, well, why not, right? Like, why wouldn't everyone want to play sport on a fair and equal level playing field? Why wouldn't we want to protect the integrity of the sport as we grow? I think we'd all agree we're kind of on this cusp, right, of really kind of solidifying adventure racing as a sport that's here to stay, a sport that will have these kind of standards and regulations and, hopefully standardizations, right, to like really make it into an entity that is here to stay, is going to grow. People can come into the sport, maybe race professionally, right? Like all of these things. And being proactive about anti-doping is so much better than having to be reactive about it. Both from, and again, I would probably say just the integrity of the sport and kind of is like the biggest factor in my mind, to be able to kind of, be making these standards and making kind of what the right and wrong of the sport will be from, not the beginning. Obviously, adventure racing has been around for a long, long time. But, from a time when, as people can become professional adventure racers more and more in the time that we live in, right, to have this be a backbone of that sport, right? We don't want to call into question their integrity and have people not take it seriously because doping is running rampant. I think the statistics are very clear if you look at high-level sport that doping exists, doping will continue to exist. It happens on a variety of levels. And so it would be very naive to think that adventure racing is going to be somehow immune to that, right? Or has been immune to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, you and I actually talked before jumping on this call about how we don't want to spend our time today talking about all of the, the rumors or the stories or such. But I do think, like, to your point here at the end, I think it is important to recognize that, people in our sport are kind of looking for an edge at times, right? At least at the top level. And I'm not saying that in any kind of accusatory way toward any individual top teams or top racers. But anecdotally, if you've been around the sport long enough, like you do hear some of those stories. And I think a lot of them tend to, stem from sleep management, right? Sleep management is such a unique challenge in our sport relative to most sports. And people do some interesting things when it comes to various kind of medications that are available to keep themselves awake, right? I think, of course, conversation about supplements. I'd be curious to know what you see kind of just in, I guess, endurance sports in general, right? Like, forget about focusing on adventure racing specifically, but endurance sports in general, like, do you think supplements are, well, let me take that back. Remove supplements. I would just ask, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges? Is it medical, basically medicine? Is it supplements? Is it kind of more intentional, serious doping issues that we all think of when we think of, like, the Lance Armstrong stories, et cetera? What do you see as actually the most prominent issue that people should be aware is happening in endurance sports?
Within the lens of like doping and anti-doping, or just in?
Yeah, specifically.
Honestly, I think education and, like, trust in the system that it works and that it's there to support fairness and to support clean athletes, right? I think a lot of people don't lean on the resources that exist to ask the questions, to, I think it's like, instead people are afraid, right? They're afraid to even ask, like, shoot, my doctor gave me this. He gave me this with a prescription, right? And, like, that fear drives secrecy around it, right? And so I think for sure there is, a contingent of people who will always be looking for that kind of 1% advantage, right, through methods that are not allowed. But I think the bigger problem around this effort tends to be in fear of talking about it, that fear that if you ask questions, that means you're doing something bad, and then, I don't know if it's even a lack of transparency, but probably a lack of resources, right? From everyone from race directors to organizations who just simply lack resources to kind of help get more resources to athletes, right? Get more information to them, answer more questions, have kind of more of a conversation around it so that it's not just this kind of fear-driven, thing that's people are so afraid to talk about, right? I mean, even coming on the podcast, it's like, oh, do I want to be, coming on? Because what if I say something, I slip up, right? And I'm not an expert in this. I'm just an athlete that has been drug tested before because I raced professionally triathlon, and you are in the system to be randomly tested at times and things like that. And I've, been in a race where I finished behind a woman who tested positive and, like, had to deal with that, right? So I'm not an expert, but I've just had experiences that really made me wish it was just talked about more, because I think that, like so many problems with society, right? If you talk about it a little bit more, it could help.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And, you're right. Like, I just floundered through a question that I couldn't articulate clearly because I'm nervous, right? This is a tough topic. So it's interesting, the idea of secrecy and fear and, how we talk about it. It makes me think of this, I'm jumping ahead in my notes a little bit, but, last year I listened to a podcast called, I think, The Ghost in the Machine. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to this podcast.
Not the whole thing, but a little bit when I saw it in your notes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for the listeners, if you like podcasting, I mean, you're listening to this podcast, so you probably don't mind. Check out The Ghost in the Machine. It's an amazing investigation, really, into some of the history with mechanical doping in cycling, right? And this is actually a topic that also might be relevant to our sport, right? We have a sport where we really insist on purity when it comes to everything must be kind of human powered. And, we also have some conversations with race directors about, well, could we include e-bikes to be more inclusive? And I think the answer to that is a simple yes, as long as that's managed properly and there are designated divisions within an event that allows e-bikes to make things more accessible. But that all said, right, one of the things I took away from listening to The Ghost in the Machine is just how even the most powerful sporting agencies and communities like cycling, who have infinitely more resources than we do, really struggle to have these conversations in ways that are transparent, where people are really kind of approaching this, I think, with everyone's best intention, with the idea of educating for the sake of educating and holding people accountable. Instead, it is all pretty clandestine. So I think that is a great point there. So I want to throw out just a hypothetical. So you started with the idea that we should be more proactive because it's better than being reactive, which I agree with. I was talking to somebody a while back about, the idea of starting to talk about this issue within the adventure racing community. And this person, who I respect deeply, actually kind of made an argument for the alternative. And I would just like to hear, I'm sure you will disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your counter. So the argument went something like this, that when you start inserting these conversations about doping into a sporting community, it just ruins everything. The fun goes away. Everyone gets so stressed out. It just adds this layer of anxiety. And, all of a sudden, something that was really wonderful and fun is no longer such. Everyone's just fixated on the competition and these questions about what everyone's doing. So can you respond to that? What do you think about that thought process toward this issue, especially in our sport where, there's not a whole lot at stake?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, is a sport really wonderful and fun when people aren't on a level playing field, right? When you're potentially encouraging things that are really harmful to athletes' health. I think because adventure racing does push the envelope so much with what the human body can sustain. Yeah. It's a huge risk factor for people to, you and I have had conversations not around doping, but just around kind of always, trying to really think like almost outside the box, right? To be just kind of smart, right? In adventure racing terms, right? Whether that's with your nav choices or gear choices and things like that. And so when it comes to trying to have that mentality around like your physical limits, right, it actually can be very, very dangerous for athletes. And I think that does ruin the wonderful fun of sport, right? If someone gets seriously hurt, if people are really, hurting their future health and things like that for the sake of this sport. And I think, we are taking a lot of risks. I think everyone would agree when we race these races. When you get into 24-hour, 36-hour expedition style racing, we're taking a lot of risks as it is for our own health in the healthiest of terms, right? And so I think that, looking at the sport and doing that with good intentions is good, but when there's kind of more malicious intentions and doping, it would be really hard to find enjoyment, I think, in the sport when things start going wrong. And I think it would be a matter of time, right, before we saw that.
Yeah, it's funny. I find myself thinking a little bit about good old ibuprofen. Right. And, it's just this, as far as I know, there's absolutely, no limitation to what you can do with ibuprofen. But, increasingly over the last number of years, I'm sure any of us that are plugged into endurance sports have heard the stories about, the potential damage, right, that ibuprofen can take. And I think about adventure racers out on the course that are popping like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of milligrams of ibuprofen at once, and then doing that every like 3 hours.
Yeah.
I actually, long before I started thinking about this issue myself, I just heard some horror stories about some of my friends in the sport, and ending up in the hospital, and kind of decided I was done with ibuprofen. Unless I had like an on-course injury, I would stop using it for any kind of real pain management. But you think about like a relatively what we consider to be a benign medication like that, and then you expand it out to, probably hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of drugs that, our community takes prescribed by a doctor, perhaps, for no other reason than they think they need to take it, or they actually do need to take it. And some of the implications that could come up when you add in dehydration and sleep deprivation and extreme, wear and tear on the body. I think you're right. Like, this is a real health concern. And that's really one of the primary driving factors for USARA looking to really have these conversations, is to get people thinking about health, beyond just the competition piece.
Yeah. And, when something is, if USADA is looking at something to be banned, right, they are looking at that the health risk to the athlete is one of the criteria. They're looking at, does it enhance sport performance, right? And then they're also looking at, does it violate the spirit of sport? And I think, looking at it from that angle, like, you and I know how hard we as individuals train, right? Our listeners right here can think about your past week, right? Everyone's balancing family, jobs, training, all of the responsibilities that life entails. And we all work really, really hard to get ourselves in shape to be able to do these events, right?
Yeah.
And I think thinking about, sometimes it seems a little bit like, but it's not fair, right? But it's not fair, and I think it's okay to stand up for that kind of moral high ground, and as for clean athletes to say, like, no, I'm doing this the right way, and I want my peers that I'm competing against to as well, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to also note, so I think you're referencing, when you say it's not fair, you're referencing like the fairness of competition, yes?
Correct. Yeah.
Right, which is absolutely true. I want to go a slightly different direction with the it's not fair. And this is where I'll kind of share something that I'm personally actually wrestling with right now. So I actually don't know what's wrong with me, but for the last number of years, I have been operating under the assumption that I have asthma. And it's not your run-of-the-mill asthma where, I struggle to breathe when I'm working out or anything like that. Like, actually, like, when I'm healthy, I really question whether I have asthma, whether I'm an asthmatic. But when I get sick, like, I'll pick up a cold that comes and goes in a day or two for everyone else in my family. I might be out for 3 months with like really serious lung issues. So one of the things my doctor has always had me do is use a nebulizer with a couple of different substances. One is approved by USADA. The other one is, it's an albuterol substance. So the same stuff you get in an albuterol inhaler, which probably like 1 out of 4 people on an adventure race course are carrying in their backpack with them. Now, the inhaler, for anyone that's like panicking right now, the inhaler's legal. You're good. The solution that you put into a nebulizer turns out to be illegal. You can't use it, and you can't use it both, of course, during competition. You're not going to hook yourself up to a nebulizer, but you can't use it out of competition either. So I haven't used this substance in, I think, 2 years. And the last year plus that I haven't used it, it's because I know that it is illegal, whereas before I did not, right? Mm-hmm. And my first instinct when I found out that it was illegal was to be like, well, that's not fair, right? Like my personal, and this goes back to the secrecy part and the fact that people don't like to talk about it, right? I don't actually fully know why it's not, but it isn't. It's not legal. And I went to my doctor a month or two ago and told him about this, and he rolled his eyes and basically was like, that's not fair. That's ridiculous, right? Like, this I don't understand this. And yet, USADA, and WADA and such have determined that there is something problematic about this drug when it comes to competition. You pointed out, they don't do this flippantly, right? Like they're not just taking drugs and deciding, well, we don't like that one, or they're doing intensive studying, right? So I don't know if I read the article you sent me about, it was Ozempic, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like fascinated to read it. And, spoiler if
Ozempic
anyone...
is currently legal now for people now who might be worrying about Ozempic. Yes.
Yeah. But what are they like? Do you remember what they're doing in terms of the process of looking at this?
Yeah, so they will actually go, and part of what they do is, so they've been testing people at various levels, amateur to professional level in various sports, like in triathlon. Amateurs are randomly tested a lot, professionals, right? So triathlon's not the only sport, but it's one I know well. And the associations actually go and will look through past collection data to be looking for markers that would show people have been taking these semaglutides, I guess is kind of the proper name, right? And they are going to be looking for patterns of usage within the athletic community that I guess would match or not match, right? Patterns of usage in normal communities, to kind of, and that's one thing of many, I'm sure, that they're doing to look to see if they should take a harder look at this, if they should be I think it goes kind of into a provisionally, a provisional list before it's banned, as they're looking at it. And so there are obviously steps that they're taking to really look hard. But when they, start to think about things, they're not just oh yeah, that could give someone a performance enhancement, we'll put it on the list. That's right. Not they're looking at the science. There's a lot of studies that they're looking at for the health effects and things like that. And for this one, they also were just saying they don't know what would happen to an endurance athlete in the middle of an Ironman who gets insulin, right? And that could cause a huge problem because of blood sugar control in an endurance event in that type of manner. So, again, safety of the athlete, right, is number one. And so there's a lot of things, and it's not going to be, we've all now been hearing about Ozempic and these things now, it's not going to be overnight that they ban this, because they're going to do due diligence to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think the articles say they're expecting that they will be evaluating it over the next year or something, I think, right? Yeah,
at least I would imagine. And, they probably have already been looking into it for a year, right?
Right. Yeah. And I imagine that's true of just about everything that they have ruled against at some point or another. So, there's a lot that goes into this. It's not arbitrary. Yeah, I guess to wrap up, it's a logical time to do it. So I'm sure some people are wondering, well, what do you do, or what am I doing, right? So I actually took the steps a week or two to initiate what's called a TUE. Right, an official exemption, and there's a process for this when you are on a medication that is prescribed by a doctor, right? So there's an actual process that you can go through. It takes some effort. You do have to work with your doctor and get documentation and such. But I think it's also important to recognize this is not some draconian process where there's no compassion for people that actually have legitimate health issues and reasons why they're taking certain substances. So there's this process. I don't know how it's going to work out for me. We'll see. But it's been actually a pretty fascinating journey for me to explore and learn about this world through my own condition. So, I think like you said, I think number one, people just need to be talking about it and not be scared about it. And, I've already had a couple of really good conversations with a couple of individual athletes in our community and kind of help them work through things. And thankfully, in those cases, come to a conclusion that they were okay, that they actually hadn't, done anything that was even technically wrong. So it's been fascinating.
Yeah. And I think, if you're in, one of the best things as you're learning about this is just kind of having that mindset now of, I'm an athlete that participates in a sport, right, under a anti-doping code. And so just having that pause, because like you said, the doctors don't care, right? They're going to be prescribing what they think you need, right, at that moment. And so a lot of times there are alternatives, right? And they might think it's silly that you're an amateur adventure racer and you need the alternative because, of whatever. But a lot of times there are alternatives, and ignorance isn't really, as this progresses, right? I think it's important to understand that you are, willingly participating in this sport with this anti-doping code now, and ignorance isn't an excuse, right? To say that. And so there is a responsibility then that you have as the athlete to have that mindset of, let me check this medication, right? Let me just have the conversation with my doctor. Let me take just a second thought of things that I've always taken without second thoughts, right? Cold medicine, my asthma meds, right? Like anti-aging things and things like that, like hormone replacement therapies are really popular right now. And those are really popular, outside of codes for anti-doping, and so just having that mindset of like, let me take a look and explore. And again, without trying to be fearful about it, but just so, even if so, it means you're educated and you're making the right decisions going forward. I think that's kind of what we're all hoping for the sport of adventure racing.
After 2 fall roundups, the Chisholm Trail Adventure Race Third Drive is coming back with a spring event this March on the 28th and 29th. The first regional qualifier of the 2025 calendar year, racers will have 12 or 24 hours to explore the Lake Whitney area, south of Dallas and north of Austin. As always, Paul Ryan and his team offer a unique event that highlights the region's rich history and unique terrain, including caves, outlaw hideouts, abandoned homesteads, and more. This year's race is Rogaine style and will revolve around Kimball Bend Park, which is famous for serving as the cattle crossing used by cowboys driving cattle up the Chisholm Cattle Trail. Winners of the 24-hour mixed gender division will punch their ticket to the Ozarks for nationals this fall. So round up some teammates and join Texas Pride for what will surely be a fun, challenging, and beautiful spring weekend.
So, Alyssa, can you describe to the curious listener who's now wondering if they are taking something they shouldn't be or are not allowed to by anti-doping standards, can you describe what the process is to figure out whether your medications are actually a problem?
Yeah, so this is actually really quite simple. There's a website. It's called globaldro.com, right? I think it's .com. It's .com.
I think so,
and
yep.
You go to globaldro.com and you fill in you're an athlete, what sport, and adventure racing is not listed on the sports there. So you can literally pick anything, you guys. I've tested it. I've picked badminton. I've picked triathlon. I've picked swimming. You just got to pick a sport, basically. I think you say you're in the United States, and then you type in the medication name, and they have everything from the generic names to the, I don't know, I'll call it scientific names. Again, I'm not an expert at this stuff, but and you do the search, you hit OK, and it will bring up the list of things that match to, and you can look, are you taking the capsule form? Are you taking the pill form? Is it an injectable thing that they want you to be taking, right? So you kind of drill in and find the proper thing, and then they make it as clear as they can be once you find it, and it's red and green, right? And it's 2 sections of in competition. It's red if it's prohibited, it's green with a big check mark if it's allowable, and the same with out of competition usage. And then if there's, kind of maybe it's prohibited in competition, but out of competition it's allowed, there might be some other kind of information about like how long you can take it ahead of competition or things like that. They have all the details you would need to know about that on that website. So that really is super, super helpful, I think, to run through and just, play with it, right? Take some things out of your medicine cabinet and put it in there and like just practice looking it up and kind of using that tool, because I do think that if you just start thinking about using it, you will kind of plug it in before you take the Sudafed the next time. Yeah.
Sudafed, I've done the same things you're describing, and just like, okay, why are all the sports the same? I don't know, but like they are, yeah. But also, it's fascinating. I remember looking up Sudafed once, And then, interestingly, finding one type of Sudafed that's banned and one type that's allowed. And my understanding, you may know this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. If I understand correctly, it's because one of those forms of Sudafed is the one that they basically realize is like some sort of placebo and really doesn't do anything. So that one is legal. Like, you can take it. Like, it might make you feel like you're getting better, but it's not going to actually do anything. Whereas the other one actually has some substances in it which are problematic for competition.
Exactly. Yep. And so again, that's something you can buy at the drugstore. You might have spent your whole life never thinking twice about. But, and again, I think it has a stimulant. So again, it could be seen as that, but also I think it's problematic in that, you're taking stimulants, you're exerting yourself really hard. And again, health of the athlete, your heart health and things like that is going to be in question. Right. So they don't want people downing a ton of Sudafed and then going out and riding hard and climbing mountains and things like that.
Right. All right, I'm curious, put you on the spot, test your detailed knowledge of the world of medications. So Sudafed is a good example. Albuterol, this thing that's probably not uncommon for people with asthma, another example. Do you have any other off the top of your head examples of things you've come across in your career where it's a common drug that people take? It's either something you can buy at a CVS or something a doctor would give you for something that is a great example of you need to be better educated because what you're taking is actually illegal.
I do think that one of the things we see a lot with women, especially now, and, thank goodness, women are performing athletic endeavors at all ages of life, right? And it is very popular now for women to be prescribed testosterone when they're going through menopause and things like that to help alleviate symptoms. And hormone replacement therapy, testosterone pellets, things like that are just very quickly prescribed by doctors to help women with symptoms of menopause and other, whatever, as they age. And, hormones like that, testosterone is actually one of those things that is just banned, period. You wouldn't get a TUE actually even for that. And so that is something that women especially should be very aware of, I think. It's a similar argument, right? I think it will be very easy for people to say, but that's not fair. And it is a tough conversation to have, and it is a responsibility of athletes who are partaking in sports that have these codes associated with them.
Yeah, interesting. Any others that come to mind?
There's actually in the track and field world, I think it was about a year ago, a pretty popular track runner. She actually tested positive and had, I don't think she had a ban. Maybe it was retroactively served because it was actually in her acne medicine, right? That was prescribed by the doctor again, and she hadn't known. So, that would be another thing. You're going to the doctor for acne, right? And the last thing on your mind is performance enhancing, right? But it's just something you really should check. I also, these days it's very common to see these kind of wellness studios and recovery studios that offer IV injections. And people should definitely be aware that basically anything injectable, it should raise a red flag when you hear that. And so, getting IV infusions of really even just saline for rehydration is not allowed in certain doses and things like that, right? So that's definitely, again, popular culture is kind of making these things seem allowable. Just saying it now, I'm probably going to be getting ads for the local IV place on my phone, right? And so, but again, those things are not paying attention to the USARA code, right? And so they aren't going to know that really you shouldn't be doing that. And it's something to be aware of.
That's a great, that's a great one. It makes me actually think historically about stories I've heard of back in the old days, back during the Eco Challenge, Primal Quest days, of some of the top teams, like who either learned how to administer an IV or had a doctor on the team, and they would give each other IV bags and a TA to recover. And I mean, on one level, like great, like good for you that you can do that, but like most teams can't do that,
Right.
So in terms of advantages, certainly there's that. The other piece which you alluded to, which I think is important, because I'm sure some people are asking the question, because I mean, there are events out there that organized athletic events that bring these recovery companies to the race and then like offer you the IV bag as an option after the event, right? Which on one level seems cool and wonderful. But, I think one of the reasons this has been ruled as something that is illegal, right, is you don't necessarily know what's in those bags, right? Like it's impossible to fully monitor that. So, I think that's a great example. You can get IVs. So if everyone, again, the people that are panicking, like, yes, your doctor can give you an IV, but when you dig into this with the USARA kind of articles and educational material, this is one that's linked on our website. It all has to be monitored by a doctor, and then it has to meet certain, thresholds. And if it goes beyond certain thresholds, you do need exemptions, which requires a doctor. So that's a great one too.
Yeah,
right.
And I think it's just important to remember, like serious problems, actual medical emergencies, right? Do what you need to do first, right? You can look at it with this lens later. And again, the system is written for that type of process. And trusting that it's there that way, I think, is an important part of this.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, I've had that conversation with myself of like, if I get to a point with my lungs that like I have no option other than to take this albuterol, and there's no alternative, and I don't get an exemption, there'll come a day where I decide, okay, I'm taking the albuterol, right? I mean, that is more important. The other thing I would just mention is like one of the most basic things you can do if you find that you're taking some kind of medication that is in violation of the codes. I mean, the first thing to do is go talk to your doctor about, is there an alternative? And there might be a really easy alternative medication that you can take that will do what you need that actually is legal. So that's always a good first step too.
Exactly.
Any other interesting like things that people should know about that you've come across? I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of things when you dig into it, but
yeah, I mean, if people find this interesting, and again, I think adventure racing, like I said, is kind of on like the precipice of all of this, right? And I think that, naivety is great because it's nice to think about that, but it is really interesting, I think, to take a look at some of the other sports and the problems that they've had, right? As they have kind of not been as proactive from the beginning. And I think Kara Goucher's book about some of the doping that happened throughout her career in track and field is a really great, very powerful read on this. And I think is important, and that's not necessarily, her story is not being told through the lens of like people around me were accidentally taking acne medication, right? I mean, it was premeditated kind of things that they were doing, but it's, I think, important to just understand and have that awareness that does happen. And, just educating yourself not only on the rules and the standards, but, maybe on some historical levels of what has happened in sport and, trying to help take responsibility for adventure racing to hopefully not find itself deep in a problem in 10 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great advice. It also, I think we're talking kind of largely to competitors here, but, as a race director, I've also been thinking about it from a race directing standpoint. And in shorter races, it's not something I would really think much about. But, at Endless Mountains, our multi-day race where we have kind of medics on site and such, and multi-day races in general, I've noticed throughout my racing career that there's a different approach to medical support at events. Some it's really, like at Endless, the way we really approach it is like our medical personnel are there for actual emergencies, the kind of emergencies where you need to get off the course, right? Like when you need to be stabilized, you need to be treated on site, etc. Like we're not there as a support crew to get you through an event. But I, have seen plenty of other events where that is their approach. Like back to the IV bags. Like there have been events where they're happy to hook you up to an IV bag and then send you on your way. And my understanding is, like in most sports that are, official signatories of USARA or WADA, that would be it. You'd be out of the competition at that point. So this is something I've been thinking a little bit about, just, speaking to the race directors of just make sure you and your medical team are kind of aware of what you should be administering on the course and not, if your athlete wants to continue. Mm-hmm. And to our earlier point, of course, like if there's a genuine medical emergency and you need to administer some kind of drug to help somebody, you should do that, right? And either the person's off the course or you let them continue unofficially. But, really educating yourself as a race director too, and have your medical team educated about what they can actually do legally.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, again, you are bringing in a lot of volunteers for those positions who, really are unaware of that, right? That wasn't in their EMT handbook that they, took the test on. It was the USADA code was not a question in that, and so just having a framework for them to be thinking through, I think will help a lot.
Yeah. I think that's good for the medical front. What about kind of the nutritional front? I think this is really about supplements, right? And this is one I haven't done a deep dive on. I've never really been somebody to take much in the way of supplements at all. So I'm kind of curious from your experience in this world of endurance sports, how big of an issue are supplements? I've got to imagine that supplements are often more of an accidental issue than an intentional one, but what's going on there?
Yeah, so, we could probably have a whole other podcast on supplements, especially in the United States, because I'm fascinated by it. I don't know how it has kind of become the Wild West that it has in a society that loves to have regulations about all sorts of things. And somehow supplements seem to have escaped this, right? So it's very important to know that supplements could be your noon hydration electrolyte tab. That is actually marketed in, the realm of categorization of things. That's actually a supplement when they file whatever they file, right, for their product.
Now, are you about to tell us that noon is illegal? Because I think everyone's going to just lose their mind, Alyssa.
No, I'm here to report that happily you can continue taking your noon. You can keep chewing the tabs without putting them in water if you need to be staying awake. That's like an excellent adventure racing trick. I know noon is certified for sports, so they're also certified as safe. And so basically that's what happens, right? The U.S., for whatever reason, and again, there are other podcasts on this topic, and I'm not an expert on this, but I educated myself a lot on this because, you're an athlete, you're looking for competitive advantages. Again, my phone, who knows what supplements I'm going to be targeted with, right?
Yeah.
After this conversation. And it's important to know, again, I think, I always look at it from this mindset of, I need to know, really take a second look at what this is, because my understanding is that supplements are not heavily regulated in the United States, right? And so what that means is they could, in theory, be contaminated, right? They could have trace levels of other substances because they're made in facilities kind of close by each other and things kind of get, contaminated. So that could happen because they might not be tested for that. It could just have less like pure ingredients, right? It just very well could not be the you see the name like organic grass-fed protein or something, right? And like your mind's kind of trained to think this is a pure substance, but it really might not be because of the way marketing works and a lack of regulations in the supplement industry, right? So you really have to try and look at it through that lens of looking beyond that. And one really simple way to do that is to look for on the supplements, they will have kind of a little emblem or they'll say they're certified for sport or certified by Informed for Sport, I think is another company that does that. And so supplement companies can pay to essentially do that extra regulation and do that extra testing on their products so that you feel better about taking them, right? You can sleep peacefully at night knowing there's less risk of contamination and things like that, that what you're buying is what the product should be. You can go to their websites and actually do searches that way for various things. If you want an omega-3 that's certified for sport, right? You could look at it that way. You do pay a little bit of a premium because they have to do this like pretty strenuous process then of batch testing and record keeping and all of that, right? To really be confident that the products they're putting out there are the products that they're advertising. And the amount, if you walk into GNC, like you're going to see a lot of supplements, most of which are not certified for sport. There's a lot of great companies out there now who actually have, made their company on marketing as they are, which is great. And I think that it definitely is worthwhile if you're someone who takes supplements and is looking, for that collagen, that vitamin D, that iron supplement, like all of those types of things, right, can be certified for sport. And it's just a good test, or a good extra step for you to take so that you can sleep peacefully at night knowing isn't that what you want anyway? To be knowing 100% that what you're taking is what it says on the label.
So you can sleep well at night while taking your CBD sleep gummies. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
CBD is probably another conversation in podcast under the USARA stuff. But yeah.
Those actually, so, I'm glad you brought up the websites, right? So one of the ones that I've used, or the one I've used, is I think nsfsport.com.
Yep.
And like you said, it's great. You can go on, you can plug in the company. And I think it's also important to note, like I was looking up this one company and realized that some of their products are certified and some of them are not, right?
Yep.
So you have to be careful about that too. It's easy to assume that everything a company is doing is great because one thing you've bought is got that icon on it, that label on it. So that's good stuff. Now, when we're talking about supplements, are we talking about things like down to kind of like basic protein powder for smoothies and stuff? Like, are we going that granular with this, or?
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes to your electrolyte powder, to the protein powder, to all of that, and I think that, again, just taking a hard look at everything that you're putting in your body as an athlete, right? Is an important part of this process. And it's worth just kind of, taking inventory and I think taking a second look. I don't think it means you have to immediately throw everything out, right? But I think it's worthwhile that as you finish that container of protein powder, right, and you look for the next one, maybe look for one that's certified for sport, right?
Yeah.
And kind of take it on that way. There's also, again, a lot of supplements where, and this is like my personal viewpoint, right? It's always a good chance to kind of look at something and think of why you're taking this. Could I be getting this through real food, right? My diet, that sort of thing, and just kind of eliminate the question mark of the supplement that way. I think is always just a good introspective activity for people and athletes to be doing. And just, you shouldn't, again, be fearful of contamination in supplements and food. I think the amount of times that has truly been proven to be an instance where someone was testing positive for that is actually very, very slim. It's often used as a defense, but when you kind of go down the wormhole of looking at what is actually proven, right, it's very, very rarely proven to be the case. And I think, my personal belief is that because it is very rare to happen, but it's, again, you'll sleep peacefully at night with the certified for sport type of supplements.
Yeah. Do you get the sense with, especially nutritional supplements? I mean, obviously there's a difference between, like you said, going into, a supplement, a supplement store where they're trying to make you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Like that's one thing. Like that's clearly, okay, let me take the stuff that's going to jack up my muscles and, give me that advantage. But do you get the sense that a lot of what's going on with supplements is really more health focused, or is it equally competition kind of focused in terms of the advantages you might get?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I think that, again, supplements are such an interesting topic in general because they, the science behind them really isn't proven, right? It's not like everyone needs to be taking these things to perform really well. And so, I think that a lot of it is probably from a health perspective of like, do we need to be taking these things, right?
Right.
And if we do feel like you need to be taking them, then make sure it's actually what you think it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend a minute on caffeine. Do you have any thoughts about caffeine?
I'm a big caffeine fan.
Yeah, I mean, it
Who
is
isn't in adventure
generally
racing?
legal, to be clear, before again we give anyone, a heart attack here. Like, yes, you can use caffeine. I mean, there are actually limits, I believe, to what you can take, but I think few of us are actually ingesting that much caffeine, right? Right,
and I think, caffeine comes into the USARA and WADA conversations on again, off again, every few years it cycles in, and you hear the murmurs that they're taking a look at it because, it's one of those things that is performance enhancing, right? You go back to what we said of they look at these things, right? It has the potential to enhance sport performance, potential health risk to the athlete, and that violates the spirit of the sport, right? So they are having that conversation about caffeine and does it check all those boxes every few years? And like you said, for now, for the most part, in the ways that we ingest it, that caffeine remains legal. But it is certainly worth knowing. I mean, we've all probably finished a 24-hour race and wanted nothing more than to just lie down and sleep, and you close your eyes and you can't because your heart's beating fast and your mind is racing, right? Because you took that caffeinated gel or two, right? An hour before getting to the finish line, and so certainly, I think it poses a risk, and it's, again, as athletes, it's our responsibility to understand that. And certainly, I think people respond differently to caffeine, and you don't want to just kind of jump off the deep end and necessarily do what you heard John Doe over there is taking for his caffeine to stay awake all night in the race, right? I think you want to do your research, you want to be training with it and like seeing how your body reacts to it and how you feel safe and healthy taking it.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Is there anything else from the endurance world that you've encountered that is kind of a common approach to sleep that is worth acknowledging?
No, I think it's a fascinating conversation in adventure racing. I think when I came into the sport 4 years ago, really, right? I was like, what are these people doing? Just pushing through the night and not sleeping and getting slower and slower and slower. And like, they're just refusing to sleep, but they're getting so slow. Like, just stop, sleep for 2 hours and then you get back, And so I think that I do think that tide is changing in adventure racing. And I think that people are beginning to realize that perhaps, maybe to go faster, you actually do want to sleep a little bit and figure out that balance of what that is. And, God forbid someone take 3 or 4 hours of sleep on the first night of an expedition race, right? But I do think we've seen some teams doing that and saying, hey, I'm moving 2 to 3 times faster than I ever have in these other days, And so I do hope that is part of kind of, just adventure racers looking at things through a new lens of, we all know that sleep is the number one, right? It's no supplement you could ever take, no anything could ever really do what some sleep can do for your body and your brain. Yeah. And I think that realization hopefully is a great thing for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that firsthand. This past year in Namibia, I was racing actually with your husband, Matt, right? And on night, I think it was night 2. More out of, I can't actually say it was 100% intended, but so Abby and I, as we've talked about in a different podcast, and Brian's going to talk to us on the Dark Zone shortly, I think, about it, but we weren't trained for this race at all. Like, we literally took a year off and then decided to do a 6-day expedition race, which I wouldn't really recommend, but it worked out. But on night 2, we were just like, we need to sleep. We were in a desert environment. The timing was such, and for various reasons, we decided we're going to sleep for 6 hours, which I've never done before, right? I've done, plenty of expedition races, followed, thousands more in terms of like the teams. And you don't see people sleeping like that. And so we wake up from 6 hours of sleep, timed well. So it was all in the dark, all at night. And Abby, Mike and I immediately sit up and look at each other, and we're all like, oh my God, I've never felt like this before in a race. And it was true, I woke up feeling not just rested, but actually in some ways it was the getting out of bed and realizing I'm not like feeling my body the way I normally do, because my body was able to recover. And so, I've been thinking a lot about sleep for a couple of years, but I think it's a great example of how we lean on medication sometimes to get us through these really challenging, whether it's the sleep deprivation or the pain or whatever. And sometimes like letting the body naturally do what it needs to do, or do it through proper nutrition, is actually the better way to do it.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of seeing Tara Dower this past summer when she set the overall male or female new speed record for the Appalachian Trail. And so the trail comes right through where we live. And so I was able to kind of drop some supplies off and Matt paced her for a little bit. And I was able to see kind of her and her crew and how they function day to day. And it was, when people are doing those kinds of endurance efforts, which I would liken to expedition style racing, right? They are backing into what they need to do, starting with their sleep and recovery and starting with their nutritional needs, right? They aren't just thinking about it as I'm going to push my body 50 miles and do what I need to do. No, Tara is like literally starting her calculations based on I need 6 hours of, stoppage time a day so that I can get at least 5 hours, because I know that's like what my body needs to feel somewhat rested and recovered enough to do the 50 miles the next day, right? And so then what am I, doing to get in the calories and, that amount of stoppage time so that I have that sleeping time? And then what pace do I need to hold, right, for the rest of the day? And then I'm going to try and hit that pace, right? And so that is the way things are done, really successfully, I think, at that level. And I know other records similarly have been done in that manner, because it's so important, and you really can't replace that with any other magic bullet. Otherwise, we would all be using it, right? We would all be getting that, percussion massage device or whatever it was that was actually like speeding up the recovery, nothing is going to really replace that. And so sleep is the number one.
Yeah. So not to get too philosophical on this, right? But why do you think it is then that despite that evidence, right, we all collectively just continue to make those same decisions and maybe, dare I say, mistakes over and over and over again when it comes to ultra endurance sports and how we treat our bodies and fuel it and how we recover and rest? Why do we keep doing it wrong? I
think it's hard to have the confidence, right, to do it differently. I think that people, it's hard to break the mold. It's hard to say, no, my team is going to sleep for 6 hours on day one, right? We're going we're going to do it this way. Because it might not work out all the time, as you kind of experiment with it and figure out exactly what that is. But I think that it's really cool to see when teams do it, right? And start thinking about like, oh, I did feel a lot better when I did that,
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to just be drawn into the competition,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to stand still when that other team, you see their lights and they're marching by you in the dark while you're pulling out your bivvy to sleep, right? And for the next 3 hours, they're going to keep marching on. And so I think that, having the confidence to know that it is worthwhile is really, really hard to act on.
Yeah. All right, that would be an amazing place to end, but I do have one more thing I want to ask you about. And we mentioned it at the beginning, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how seriously we should take mechanical doping when it comes to cycling, and the fact that, especially in a longer race, in event racing, like cycling is a big part of our sport. Is that something we really should be thinking about and talking about, or do you not see that as an issue?
I would probably put it into the why not category, right? Mm-hmm. Start having the conversations, start making sure that that feeling of fear, right, isn't growing with athletes, making sure that race directors are educated and people feel like they can ask the questions around it, right? They could maybe, be pointing out to each other like, hey, man, you shouldn't be thinking like that. You shouldn't be even making those jokes about that, right? I think that the more we can create that culture of community around the right thing in the sport is only going to help, whether or not, the mechanical doping becomes an issue or not. Why not just have this culture of kind of transparency and, looking out for one another to be keeping the playing field level? It's, you're not going to lose anything from that.
Well, I think that works just fine to end there. I think you summarized it quite well. I think that's really kind of encapsulates what we at USARA have tried to do with rolling out some information about this topic. Like we want to educate, we want to inspire conversation, we want to get people thinking about their own agency with how they are approaching sport, both from a nutritional and a medical, but also perhaps a mechanical standpoint. It's really about, first and foremost, community and taking care of ourselves and our teammates and, trying to work together. I mean, for a sport that's so focused on team, it feels like we've already gotten an advantage on some sports where it's so much about like siloing people individually and, secrecy and such. So I guess I would say look out for your teammates and, make sure that we are not just keeping the playing field level, but, looking out for each other's long-term health. We all want to still be out there adventuring when we're 50, 60 years old, if not beyond. So just a couple of quick reminders. We've already mentioned, I think, most of these, if not all of them. But, if you're curious to learn more, pop onto the USARA website. We have kind of laid out, our actual policies on this topic, including we didn't talk about kind of the consequences of actual violations when it comes to doping violations. But, if you're curious, that is all laid out there. But more importantly, we have probably, 15 or 20 resources that are actively linked on that webpage. We mentioned Global Dro, where you can look up your medications. I need to check if we have a link to the Certified for Sport, page, but if we don't, we'll try to get that added soon. And then there's a whole host of articles. There's an article about caffeine, if you're curious about reading where USADA stands on that. And most of our links go to various articles that USADA offers. So that is it from me. Alyssa, thank you so much for taking the time. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share, or do you think we've really covered it and gotten people thinking and maybe a little bit scared about what's in their what's in their bathroom and behind the mirror there?
Hopefully we didn't scare anyone too much, but no, mostly just thank you to yourself and USARA for the work that I know you've put in over these last few months to make a policy. I think it's a great step for the sport moving forward, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Oh, Thank you, Alyssa, and good luck with your training and your return from your medical
Medical sabbatical?
medical sabbatical. I like that. Yeah. Look forward to seeing you back out there.
All right. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks.